If you are a big fan of developing websites with Python, Django, Flask, doesn't matter which framework you use, then this video is for you, because in that one we are going to cover how to perform a post request without refreshing the page. So when we develop a website with Flask, for example, every time that we perform a post request, we are required to redirect our clients to some location. Well, in that one, we are going to learn how to do this in the background while the page is still running. So think about websites like cryptocurrency websites, right? Those websites updating their data every millisecond to give you the most updated data. So this means that there are probably tons of post requests to the database to update the database itself. So that's what we are going to learn in that one. We are going to learn how to perform changes against the database, against the backend of our websites without reloading the page. And that's going to be very, very cool to look at it. So let's get started. So in order to show how this is going to work, we are going to implement a very minimalistic Flask project, but this means that you can still get it working on your Django project. So there are great reasons to follow along with this video. Now you want to make sure that you have Python and Flask installed on your system interpreter, because that's what I'm going to use. Now this is also the directory that the Visual Code is pointing at, so make sure that you have a terminal and Visual Code opened that is pointing to the same directory. Alright, so we're gonna start by writing the most basic Flask application that we can. So from Flask import Flask capitalized like that, so we are importing the Flask library. Now let's go ahead and create a quick application here by saying app equals to an instance of a Flask, and this is also going to receive an argument that will specify the name of the current file with the known convention of _name. And now I'm also going to say if _name is equal to _main, which is known as a famous convention in Python that checks if this file is running directly and not being imported as a module. Now, if that is the case, then I'm going to run the run method of app, and I'm going to pass in here hostname equals to my localhost IP address. I'm going to use the 5001 port, and I want debug mode on, so I'm going to say debug equals to true. Okay, so now that we have this, you'll probably also notice that we already have a templates directory in here, which is also happen to have a very minimalistic index.html file. So let's create a quick route here that will send our users to that index.html file once they will try to visit the first page. So I will allow myself to use here the app.route decorator, and then I will use the / just to use the root path, and then I will say def index, and if we are here, then we want to send our users to the index.html file. Now make sure that you also import the render_template function from the entire Flask library. This is important, otherwise you are going to see some exceptions. Okay, so now that we have this, let's go ahead and try to execute this basic application by saying python main.py, and you can see that we have some problems. I think that's because it should be equal to host like that, so let's change it, and then I'm going to try this one more time. Okay, so you can see that things are running well. Now if I was to check if that's going to work, then you can see that this is exactly the case. I see first page and everything is working. Okay, so now that we have done this, then we're gonna need to understand how to perform a post request in JavaScript. JavaScript will be the library that will interactive with the client side of your application. So this means that you need to write JavaScript code that needs to be loaded each time that you do something like pressing on a button. So that's why it will take us an effort to write some basic JavaScript if we want to perform a post request without refreshing the page, without rendering a template. So that is achievable by using the combination of some JavaScript libraries. And one of the first libraries that we want to load to this HTML file will be a library that is called jQuery. jQuery is known as a very popular JavaScript library, and you are going to see jQuery everywhere in each website that you are going to read its code. So that's why I will allow myself to now import this library into this HTML file. Now, one simple way that you can do that is by using the script tags in here and then just point to your source file where the code for the library is located. Now, we don't want to download manually files to our local machine. We can also point to the link where the JavaScript code is located. So that's exactly what we are going to do here. We are going to specify here a link that will be responsible to include all the code for the entire jQuery library. And the URL is of course available in the description, and you can see that this is the page that I'm talking about. Now, by the time that you watch this video, there might be a different version for jQuery being released. So if you want to make sure what is the latest version, then you can also go ahead and search jQuery download, and you can go here to the first page and you can visit one of the first links in here. Maybe by the time that you watch this video, there will be version 4, something like that. So that's the link basically. I'm just going to copy that and paste this inside here, and we are good to go. Alright, so now that we have done this, we need to understand that we must have some basic elements so that we will have the ability to perform a post request in the background. So what that means, it means that we are going to create several elements here, which will be the following. So I will start by creating a text area, which will be just a basic text box that I will use an identifier for it. Let's call it first box, like that, and I will say inside this edit me, so we will know to edit this one, and we will also go down below here and we will create a button. Now when a user will press on the button, then we will perform this post request that we are talking about. So let's create a quick button here, and I'm just going to say perform post, like that. And one of the things that I'm also going to do here, I'm going to use the onClick attribute, but I'm going to leave it empty for now. Alright, so now that we have done this, then I'm going to start writing some basic JavaScript code to show you what needs to be done to create a post request. So we will create a script tag here in addition to that one, and now we are allowed to write any JavaScript code that we'd like to. We can go ahead and print things in the console, and we can do some more stuff like performing a post request. So first things first, I'm going to wrap all my code in a function so it will be easier to read and easier to call the entire functionality when we just press on a button. And you will see what I mean just in a second. So I will create a function and I will just say here perform post in camel case, which uses the second word as capitalized, and then I will open up and close parentheses and also curly brackets, like that. Now once we have a function, then we are allowed to call the function on our onClick attributes. So what that means, it means that if I was to go here and say perform post, open up and close parentheses, then it should be okay. It should perform the entire code from this function once we are pressing on that button. And if we want to experience this for a quick second, then we can only print something very basic in the console.log it works, right? And I will save this and I will make sure that our website is still running. We can try to refresh it, although I don't think it is necessary because we are in debug mode. And now I will bring in our website, I will refresh it, and you can see that now we have some more different elements on our page. If we want to right click and inspect to see the console, then let's try to see if that's going to work. So I know that this thing here is a little bit larger than expected, so let's try to do something like that. Alright, so the expected behavior here, when we click on perform post, we should see something in the console, and you can see that it works, right? So this means that we have done a great job until this point. Okay, so now that we got this working, then now we want to change the line from here to something that will really perform the post request for us. So in order to do that, then we are going to use a methodology in JavaScript that is called AJAX Request. So AJAX, known as asynchronous JavaScript requests or XML requests, something in that kind. But anyway, this is a methodology that allows you to create asynchronous requests in the background, and that is the way that it is called, because you cannot take for granted the fact that you can perform some additional requests once the page is already loaded. So that is why this is considered as asynchronous, and this is the function that we are going to use. Now the syntax that we are going to use is going to be a little bit different to call this function, which is called AJAX. We are going to delete this and we are going to use the $sign to call the library of jQuery. That's the convention in JavaScript. And then we are going to call this AJAX method. You can see that there is even an auto-completion from our side. You can see that it is considered as a method, and you can see that it comes from jQuery stat something. So that's what we are going to use, and we are going to call this by opening up and closing parentheses, and we are also going to do that with the curly brackets like that. Now you can even see that we have some recommendations by Visual Code, which is very nice. You can see that there are some hints about what arguments we need to specify, so you can definitely take a look in this if you want in the future. Alright, so now I'm going to press on enter and write the arguments that are necessary to perform a post request in here. So the first thing will be the type. What type of request I want to perform. So of course it will be post. Make sure that the syntax is colon after the key, and then to specify more arguments, just separate them by comma. Now the additional argument will be the URL, which I'm going to leave empty for now. And the third argument will be what data I want to send to the server side when I perform this post request. Now we know that post requests are made for sending some data to the server side, and then the server side will do something for us. So that's why we need to send some data, and the data that you can send could be sent by the convention that is very alike the Python dictionary. So you can say that you'd like to send, for example, something like that, name, and then get out of the string, colon, Jim, like that. So this is valid, right? This will send one key value pair where the name is, where the key is name and the value is Jim. Okay, so now that we have done this, then obviously we don't want to leave the URL empty here. We want to take care to perform a post request to a proper URL. So that's why I'm going to go to my main.py file, and I'm going to just create an additional route that will only support handling a post request. And the way that you can do that is, again, by creating an app.route decorator. Let's call our path this time create_file. Make sure that you include this /, and then an additional argument is going to be passed here, and I'm just going to say methods is equal to a list. Now this list could include the methods that you want to allow, and I will only allow here post, like that. So this should be enough to have a route with only a post request. Now I will name this function create file as well, and I will go ahead and only use here pass temporarily. And now that we have this, then we can go to our index.html and we can use /create_file, or we can decide that we'd like to be more generic and we can use the built-in URL_for Flask function. We can go ahead and use URL for parentheses, and between those single quoted strings we can specify our route name, not the name of the URL but the name of the function. That's actually considered a better way to do that. So if one day I'd like to change the URL, then we will not be affected. It is just more common approach when it comes to pointing to URLs from the template side. So again, this will be the convention to do that. And now that we have this, then we can allow ourselves to go back to the server side and do something with the arrived information. Now, the way that you can access it is by seeing what data is inside the request. So first things first, I need to import the request object from Flask, and then I need to write the following code. So first things first, I want to verify that the request method is actually post. So I can say if request.method is equal to post, and if that's the case, then I want to first print this thing. So I will go ahead and say print request.form. Now, by accessing the form key of the request, then we are basically going to see everything, meaning each piece of data that is sent from this data. So that's the way that you can access the data, by printing the request.form, and then we can really do something with it. Now let's verify that our website is running. So it's not running, and I see that I changed somewhere this key back to hostname. So excuse me about that. This should be host as expected and as I showed you earlier in this tutorial. So I'm going to clean our screen and I'm going to say python main.py and make sure that the website is running as expected. Now, one more thing that we should be doing when we perform a post request is to return some kind of response back. Now, since we really don't want to return anything in this case, we will only return some data that will indicate that the post request has been completed successfully, because our main goal is to stay in the same page. This should be only a background post request. So that's why the convention in Flask will be just to return a tuple that will return an empty string, and the status code will be 204. Like that, this will mark just an HTTP successful code response that will indicate that the post response has been done successfully. And I just realized that this hostname key is again back, so excuse me about that. It is probably because some saves that I undoed. So that's why I'm again going to use this host equals to that value. Make sure that you have here host and not host name. Alright, so before checking this out, I'm going to make sure that everything has been set up correctly in here. So we have our HTML and our body with text area, and the button is on click, and it calls this function of perform post, which is written here as well. Let's also delete this space from here, so we will have a clean look in this HTML. And let's also delete this text from here. So we are doing some cleanups before going ahead and trying this out. All the commas are here valid. Okay, so this should work. So if we were to go back and again clean our screen and say python main.py, then we should be seeing in the terminal the expected result once we are clicking on a button, right? So I'm going to bring in my browser and I'm going to use those side by side. Okay, so if we refresh this page, you can see that it works. We have the get working great. If we are clicking here, then you can see that we see some result. We see some immutable multi-dictionary, and you can see that it uses name equals to Jim. So this means that we have the data in our side. It means that we can do something with it. Now, if you know that you expect to have a key with the name of name, then you can go ahead to your server side. You can go to your main.py file and you can do something with the data, right? You can decide that you want to create a file now. So let's actually go ahead and try to create a file. So we can use the with open convention here, and we can just name this file the way that the name is coming from the request. So I will go ahead and use a formatted string here to modify the name of the file that we want to create, and I will use curly brackets open and close to refer to the value inside the formatted string, and I'm going to use request.form.get, and here I will use single quotes. This is very important, and I will refer to the key of name, as we know that is coming from the client side. Now I also want to make sure that this is a text file, so after getting out from the curly brackets I will use .txt, and I will use write permissions when we create a new file. Now, if this code is new to you, then I have a video that I explain how to handle files in Python. So if you want to check out more on how to handle files with Python, then this is a very detailed video on that topic. Alright, so now I will go ahead and say as if, and then I will just write something normal to that file. I will say file created and successful post request, like that. So very simple, and once we create the file, again we return this 204 response to indicate that the post request has been completed successfully. Alright, so now that we have this and we verify that our website is running, okay, so you can see that it detected some changes, which is very great. I can go back to my browser, refresh the page and perform a post request. So you can see that we received 204 code status back, which is great. And now to the real thing. Let's see if really we have created a new file, and you can see that we have a gem.txt file with the expected text. So perfect result, and really a great way to perform a post request without refreshing the page. Now it's up to you what you want to do with your post request in Flask. Maybe you need to update something very quick in your database, or you want to do something that requires post request. So that's one way that you can do that. Of course, there are ways to make this request more securely, but that's the basic way how you can get started by creating tons of post requests without really refreshing the page, which might be very annoying sometimes for your clients. Alright, so this will close out our video. Hope you learned something new in that one, and if you have any questions, feel free to raise in the comment section and I will make sure that I read them out. Okay, so again, I really hope you enjoyed it and see you next time.